How close are we to a COVID-19 vaccine? Research teams in the UK have released promising results from early trials. But once a vaccine is developed, how do we make sure that everyone gets it? The race for a COVID-19 vaccine is gathering pace. Scientists around the world are competing to develop a safe and effective treatment that may help end the pandemic. Years of research is being completed in just a few months. A team at Oxford University in the UK has released promising results from early trials. But whilst there's excitement, doctors warn there's still a long way to go before a vaccine is widely available. We'll bring in our guests in just a moment, but first this report from Paul Brennan.
Phase 1 really couldn't have gone much better for the Oxford team. Early positive signs now confirmed in the published research.
So this is an important milestone on the path, but we're now moving rapidly forwards to try to evaluate whether the vaccine actually protects the population by conducting large-scale trials, and we have 10,000 people already vaccinated around the world.
We still need to see how the vaccine performs in older people who are more at risk of severe disease than the people we vaccinated in this study. So that's the subject of future work, and there'll be more publications to come.
The Oxford vaccine is adapted from a common cold virus found in chimpanzees. Spike glycoprotein, a genetic material from the COVID-19 virus, was added. The hope is the human body will develop immunity to the spike protein, stopping the virus from entering cells and preventing infection. Tests indicate the vaccine produces two reactions by producing a defensive antibody response as well as T cells which attack the infected cells. T-cell response peaked just 14 days after volunteers were injected. Antibody response peaked at 28 days. And side effects were minor, mainly just tiredness and headaches, treated with paracetamol.
I'm hopeful. I got my fingers crossed, but to say that I'm 100% confident that we'll get a vaccine this year or indeed next year is, alas, just an exaggeration. We're not there yet.
This is a hugely encouraging result for the team here in Oxford, but provoking an immune reaction is just the first stage in vaccine development. Phase 3 trials already underway in the UK, South Africa and Brazil are looking at issues such as optimal dosage and exactly how much protection vaccinated people have when exposed to the actual coronavirus. 9 in 10 vaccine projects end in failure, and there is no guarantee that the early promise of the Oxford trials will lead to an effective COVID jab. But it is a very positive step. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera, Oxford.
The World Health Organization is tracking around 160 possible vaccines against COVID-19. Most are still in the preclinical stage, being tested on animals. At least 24 are in phase 1, where the potential vaccines are given to a handful of people, or phase 2, where they're tested on hundreds of people. 3 products have reached phase 3 trials. This involves vaccinating thousands of people to check for safety and side effects. These are from the Chinese company Sinovac. It's conducting tests now in Brazil. There's also the University of Melbourne and Murdoch Children's Research Institute in Australia, and the University of Oxford and AstraZeneca trials in the UK, which we mentioned earlier. Well, the World Health Organization says whichever vaccine does succeed, it must be available to everyone.
We want a groundswell of political leaders believing in making a vaccine or therapeutics a global public good. And this should not be considered as a charity to those who cannot afford. The advantage of using fairness or access to also poor countries is the world can really be lifted up and lift itself out of this pandemic together, which can speed up the economic recovery.
Let's bring in our guests now. And in Lancaster in the UK, Mohammed Munir, lecturer in virology at the University of Lancaster. In Johannesburg, Helen Rees, member of the WHO's Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on the COVID-19 vaccine. And in Hong Kong, John Nichols, clinical professor in pathology at the University of Hong Kong. A very warm welcome to all of you. Helen, you are leading this vaccine trial in South Africa. How significant is the response that humans have had to the Oxford vaccine?
Well, in fact, I'm not leading it, but I'm very involved in the vaccine approvals and the science of vaccine, the research going on in South Africa. But in terms of your question, it's been very interesting to see that there's been a very positive response from communities to enrolling in the vaccine trial. For the Oxford vaccine, there are 3 sites recruiting and wanting to enroll 2,000 people, including 50 people living with HIV infection. And people are really queuing up to join the study.
Yeah, that's quite interesting in itself. I was wondering how you do get people involved in a trial.
Well, South Africa is perhaps a little bit unique in the sense that we've been grappling with both HIV and TB as major epidemics for many years. So we've set up really very experienced clinical trial sites that are very used to doing both vaccine trials and prevention trials in communities with thousands of participants. And our clinical trial sites also have community advisory boards. So one of the ways that we do this is that we talk very strongly to the community about what we want to do and why we want to do it. And they give us equally strong feedback about the acceptability or otherwise and how we should do things. So part of it is community awareness. But we've had a lot of media attention, as you can imagine, to this because it was the first country to do COVID vaccine trials in the African region. So that in itself has created enormous interest.
OK. John, so we've got a development here where we see the development, the creation of antibodies and T cells. How excited are you about this milestone?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting aspect because we're looking at both the cellular immunity as well as the humoral. So we've also been using some antibodies, but at this stage, Hong Kong's very small, so we don't have a clinical trial on vaccines. But so we've just been focusing more on the small animals, especially the hamsters, and so we've I think getting both the T cells as well as the humoral immunity is a crucial part.
OK, and Mohammed, there are 160 vaccines in various stages of development, including, I believe, one by Lancaster University. What stage are you at?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are multiple vaccines and multiple technologies that are being deployed in different parts of the world. And here at the Lancaster University, our approach is slightly different. What we are doing is to take an avian virus, the virus that can cause infection in birds, and it's pretty harmless in humans. So we are using basically the same approach as Oxford, but a different backbone that is called Newcastle disease virus. At the moment, we have demonstrated its preclinical studies, and we are doing some animal work, including hamster and mice, to demonstrate that it induces the immune responses. And as it stands so far, it's pretty encouraging.
OK. Helen, as Mohammed says, it's all very encouraging at the moment, but we must remember these are very early days. At what stage is a vaccine ready to be mass-produced?
Well, I guess there's 2 answers to that. One of the things that we've done globally, as people have invested in these very early vaccine candidates, is to, in parallel, actually say, we can't wait till the end to actually identify where we're going to manufacture them. So there's already work going on to identify manufacturing sites, existing vaccine manufacturers asking and looking at their capacity to change. So that's already being looked at and happened, although we don't have yet an effective vaccine. But in terms of the vaccine development side of things, all of these findings are extremely encouraging. And we have 3 vaccines where we've got encouraging findings in terms of the immune response. What we need to find out from much larger trials with many thousands of participants is whether those immune responses are going to turn into either protecting completely from infection or to reduce the severity of disease. And those are the advanced stage clinical trials, which in terms of the Oxford vaccine, they're moving very quickly, but many of these vaccines will move in the next few months quite quickly into those advanced, what we call phase 3 clinical trials. And once we have those results, that's when we really would say, and if they're favorable, that's when we would say we think that we've got a vaccine that is that we can roll out. But we would also have to then look and say, who do we roll it out to? Because some vaccines, for example, might not work in older people. Some vaccines won't have, most of these vaccines won't have been tested, for example, in pregnant women. So there'll then be a secondary look to say, how many vaccines do we have that appear to work? limited numbers, who would we prioritize? And what are the clinical trials telling us about how this works?
Absolutely. I mean, distribution is a very big part of this discussion. I do want to come on to that in just a moment. In terms of the timeline, of course, what everybody wants to know is when a viable vaccine is going to be produced. And these usually tend to take a decade, don't they? I think the fastest was mumps, which took 4 years. Is it at all feasible that a vaccine against COVID-19, John, could be produced within a year to 18 months?
Well, I think as Helen has pointed out, it can be done, but there's so many crucial questions which she's pointed out, which we need to look at. Is basically, will it be 1 dose or 2 doses? Does it need an adjuvant? In Hong Kong, we have the big problem where 18 to 20% of our population is over the age of 55, which is an age in which immune senescence can creep in, which means that they may not mount a proper antibody response when we give them the vaccine. And that's a population which is most in our locality to getting the severe disease. So I think it's going to be a big problem about, as Helen's pointed out, both who you give it to and how many doses you give, and also realizing that we'll be coming up in another few months to the winter season, where we're going to be also coupling with influenza, because right now many influenza studies have been put on the back burner because of COVID, and so I'm worried that we're going to get a double whammy in this winter with both influenza as well as resurgence of COVID. And some of the research which we've been doing is actually looking at how much influenza can actually influence COVID replication, so that's actually one of our greatest fears about what's going to happen this coming winter.
That's certainly one we'll be watching out for. I mean, Helen, you say you've got a successful trial of people, and you've got a lot of volunteers, but how do you test a vaccine on vulnerable people? How do you test a vaccine on elderly people or people with comorbidities?
Well, you're obviously going to be, I mentioned that we've got a small subgroup who are HIV infected. And one of the things, there's several things we want to check there. One is the vaccine going to be safe? Because the immune system is compromised, even if people are on antiretrovirals. And the second one, is it going to work? Because again, you've got an immune system that isn't necessarily as robust as somebody who's not living with HIV. So there you often have much more rigorous safety model, even more rigorous than we're seeing in the if you like the general population. So you'll look carefully at safety, and you look very closely and carefully at the immune response. And that would be the same for older people. You'll be particularly, as John was saying, interested to say, do they mount the same immune response as we're seeing in younger populations? If they don't, is that an indication that this vaccine doesn't work? If it's not quite as good, do we know that? We won't know that. That's the problem. The immune response, if it's there, we can't tell you for sure whether it will or it won't protect. And if it protects in younger people and we see a lesser immune response in older people, we still can't say for sure whether that means that we need to give more doses, booster doses, or whether we shouldn't be giving it at all because it won't be effective. We're still going to need clinical data.
And Mohammed, there's a very strong group, isn't there, that's calling for what they call challenge trials. This is where vaccinated people are deliberately infected with COVID-19. This raises up all sorts of ethical questions, doesn't it? Because when they've happened in the past, they've always had an effective treatment. But of course, there isn't even an effective treatment now for coronavirus. What's your idea of your response to challenge trials?
Yes, this idea has been coined just to speed up the whole process of trial. Because basically, what we do, any vaccine that comes into the human has to pass through a sort of animal safety trial anyways. But this idea is being applied before for the flu vaccine validation. But as you said, that if there are proper treatments available and we understood the disease enough that in case any severe consequences appear, we would be able to tackle that. But beside that, there is very less motivation really to get into this trial, and by all means it should be avoided. That is my personal stance on that. But of course, there are countries where the disease is getting down, and they are a bit really getting into human trials so that they can demonstrate the efficacy in a timely manner. But I think there are other elements that what we are talking about. For example, South Africa, countries are moving into the population where the disease is really high. So there are alternatives. So we can avail those instead of going into the human trial.
Is there any evidence, Mohammed, that in the rush to find a vaccine, there's any evidence that safety trials have been bypassed or sped up?
Well, the element that I am more worried about is because we are compressing 10, 15 years time into 1 year or so, and there is an unprecedented pressure onto scientific community for the pharmaceuticals and also for the general public to apply on. But one thing is pretty clear that WHO and other regulatory authorities, they have hundreds of years of experiences altogether to really set up pipeline how the vaccine need to be assessed before it can roll out into the manufacturing and the scaling up. So I'm pretty confident that whatever the outcome of this vaccine would be, that is depending on the nature of the vaccine. But when it comes to the approval, it would only be possible when we have really safety, immunogenicity, and all of the parameters that are required for the vaccines to be rolled out. That is the only one will be approved.
Okay. John, do you share that confidence?
I'm a little bit more skeptical because one of my concerns is that certainly what we've been seeing in the Hong Kong population is that you're getting a lot of, when you get the mild disease and the asymptomatic, and that's going to be is that the media says that only about 50% of the population, that's the adult population, would actually have the vaccine, because I think many people say it's a very mild disease, why should I get a vaccine? So I think there's going to be the incentive for those who just see this as being a very low risk disease to actually get the vaccine. And then the second is some of the work which we've been looking at is that it may prevent severe disease, but will it actually stop replication in the upper respiratory tract, and will it actually stop transmission? So we may be successful at avoiding a pneumonia, but I'm not too sure whether or not vaccines themselves may actually, or how much they'll stop transmission. And as it's been pointed out, we're really compressing what's normally a 10-year program into 1 to 2 years. And there's always this safety aspect. I think we've got memories of what happened with the dengue vaccine in the Philippines, where we had the side effects. And so it meant that people then stopped having their measles vaccination. So we saw a big outbreak of the measles. So it's always that big concern of the possible side effects leading to the general public staying away from it.
Helen, it's such an interesting point, isn't it? What if there is a low uptake? I mean, a recent poll also showed that 50% of Americans don't want to take a vaccine. They simply don't trust in the process. They think it's too sped up, it's too politically motivated. If you've got a vaccine but no one's taking it, you may as well not have a vaccine.
So it's funny that you say that, because it almost feels like there's a global world divide debate going on. On the one hand, it is that, will there be uptake? And so there would be considerations, for example, in the country like the US, where it appears that many people might be reluctant or hesitant, and you've got an older population in whom it might be much less effective. So you might not be able to immunize quite a significant proportion. Now, if you only have a partially effective vaccine, that's the other thing we haven't mentioned. We're not anticipating that every vaccine in development, A, is going to work, but B, is going to be 100% effective. So what if you only have a partially effective vaccine with partial uptake? What does that do to community transmission, as John mentioned? I mean, are we able to interrupt transmission? What does that do, in the next winter season, when you've got many vulnerable people who are not going to have antibodies and will not have been immunized? You're going to see resurgences and resurgences. But I think the other side of that is that if I think about the African region at the moment, is that we are deeply concerned that actually what we might see is a sort of mass purchasing. It's called vaccine nationalization. So that mass purchasing and a very restrictive allowance from countries that are manufacturing the vaccine or that develop the vaccine. We saw this with the US with remdesivir, which is a therapeutic agent. And there will be enormous pressure on governments who have done the research and are manufacturing the vaccines, there's going to be enormous pressure on them to say, well, it has to be my population first. So from the African region, we're arguing very, very strongly that there needs to be equitable access. WHO is also arguing this incredibly strongly. Many of the global agencies. We need equitable access because at the end of 2021, what we anticipate is that we think we might have an effective vaccine, but we're not going to have enough for the whole world. We're saying, how do you divide up limited access and who should be the priority for that? And in fact, the African Union has become quite vocal in saying there needs to be consideration of this now. So on the one hand, we've got people saying we don't want to take the vaccine in the global north. And on the other hand, in the global south, we're saying we want the vaccine and we demand that we get our fair share. So these are really, really important global debates that we've got to be talking about.
Absolutely, and distribution is a key part of this argument, isn't it? Mohammed, we've got the UK buying 190 million doses of different vaccine. It's hedging its bets. It's certainly part of the global north that's trying to buy up as many samples or doses as it can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a primary reason for them to buy different vaccine from different manufacturers are really because none of the vaccine is yet at the stage where everyone can count on. And the vaccines that UK government have contracted, those are based on different technologies. So just to ensure that whatever the technology out of that would become available in terms of approval and regulatory processes, they would be in the position to purchase them and to deploy in the field. But beside that, of course, different vaccines are at different stages. So none of that vaccine is really at the stage where we can really count on.
Could there be a global vaccination program?
Well, that would be an ideal choice to move forward because many of the points that we've been touching upon is really the take-up and also the distribution and access. I mean, even the vaccines, those have been there for centuries, really are not really possible to get them to every point of the need. So therefore, if such an initiative is in place at this moment and we are in the position to set up bold international laws, I think that would be ideal moving forward. But as it stands now, I can't see anything happening. Although Gavi meeting here in the UK last month have pledged a quite significant amount of money to really dedicate onto the COVID-19 vaccine into the countries where they cannot afford. But that is a thing that probably need to be seen when it comes to execution.
John, we've gone from the very top of this show being rather excited about this breakthrough at Oxford University to the discussion rather downplaying the significance of these developments, throwing up all sorts of questions. Do you think a vaccine is going to be the thing that stops coronavirus pandemic?
No. Because I think all the issues which we've raised is that I think if it is effective, it will, as has been mentioned before, will probably decrease the amount of severe pneumonia in the younger to middle-age group. But I think that probably is that it will have to be together with what we've been using now for the past 6 months, which are the social factors, the distancing, the masks, and the contact tracing, together with the dedicated hospitals units to look after the COVID patients. My personal view is I think the countries which are saying we wait till the vaccine, is are going to be a bit disappointed because, as we pointed out, if the vaccine is not totally effective, if it's not, if it's got some maybe a few side effects, what we've found in Hong Kong when we've had the lockdown. And we've come out of it is to say, well, now what? We can't keep on with this so much restricted isolation. So I think that we'll have to try and find a medium where balancing out, use of a vaccine versus antivirals versus preventive measures. Probably is what we've been also doing for influenza and for other viral diseases for the past 80, 90 years.
It's been such an interesting discussion. I do wish we had more time to continue it, but we will return to debate this issue again, I'm sure, many times. For the moment, though, thank you very much to our guests, Mohammed Munir, Helen Rees and John Nichols.